Well, welcome everyone. And so we're going to dive into some content now for a half hour, 40 minutes, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some sort of next steps and a couple of announcements and some asks of you guys there. So Dave, I think I'm going to hand it back to you now, just to orient folks and kind of where we're going to head today.
That sounds great. So just to reintroduce myself to the folks that I haven't met yet, and a couple of people that are on the call, Elena and Doug, I'm certainly familiar with. My name's Dave Walsh. I have been involved in healthcare and specifically Medicaid for quite a few years now. And I lead a group in that Medicaid healthcare arena called the MITA TAC, or Technical Architecture Committee. My goal is to see what we can bring out of healthcare, where there is a lot of activity right now in terms of implementing APIs and accessing data and providing interoperability and so forth. So any lessons learned that we can bring from that community. There are new rules coming out from both CMS and ONC talking about the new rules, and something that is of a great deal of interest in the healthcare space, something called FHIR. FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Services, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about that more probably on the meeting on the 26th. In this community, we certainly have another set of data model standards, and maybe I'm expressing that wrong, but it's something called NIC, which is a set of standards on how to define the data that is being exchanged from system to system. So based on
close enough, David.
Pardon me?
This is Brian. Close enough.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And you know, much more serious discussion needs to be had about all of that.
Yes, I agree.
And both with regard to FHIR modeling, FHIR Core, US Core, US CDI, and of course NIM Health. And it's one of those really wonderful areas that we will probably spend a lot of time talking about, but maybe not for the next 5 minutes.
Sounds good, Brian. So I'll reach back out to you a little bit more towards the end of the call to talk about NIM Health and your activities and so forth, if that's okay. So
thank you. Yes.
My belief right now is that we are probably going to be dealing with kind of a hybrid model. There will be things in healthcare. For example, there's a group out of the Siren Initiative, something called Gravity, that is looking at defining in FHIR the social determinants of health. And that's just an example of something that we may be dealing with. I would expect we will be long-term, but we will also be dealing with NIM. So the vision that I'm starting to see in my mind is one of a hybrid set of interfaces into systems. And based on some conversations we've had recently, I think there's two categories of interoperability that we should be thinking about. One is system-to-system interoperability, where there are existing systems that would benefit from exchanging data with other systems. And I believe there is a need to have clients or their representatives be able to access their information. And that would be more of a client access than a system-to-system interface. My belief is we're going to wind up dealing with both of them. I will say that in the healthcare arena, CMS had put up a set of APIs, or application programming interfaces, that accesses CMS explanation of benefits information. And their model, when they put this up, was to provide APIs into this information, which is certainly going to be useful for the beneficiaries and so forth. But for CMS to provide application programming interfaces into Medicare claims data, some of which they have as synthetic data for demonstration purposes, testing purposes, and so forth. But if you are a Medicare recipient, you can get to your real information in there. And the thought in their mind really was, if CMS provides APIs into that data, then make that available for developers to be able to do magical things with that data, useful things with that data. So if you want to get on to and look at your explanation of benefit data, you may have a number of different applications being provided by vendors to be able to access that data. So that's something that we should consider as we move forward. I think many of the standards upon which FHIR is built are very popular in the IT marketplace any way you look at it. And to the best of my knowledge, I'll admit right up front, I am not an expert on NIM. I hope to become one as we go along with the help from people like Brian and Chris and others. But I think my sense is that NIM currently does not have much in the way of transport for getting the data from point A to point B. So we may be looking at best practices out of the healthcare space, the goal being to make it easy for developers to be able to exchange the interoperable data and have a common agreement on what that data is. So that's a lot of words about myself. We'll be getting more into the NIM FHIR on the 26th, as I said, and kind of walking our way through what are the topics that need to be addressed as we start to achieve interoperability in the human services space, and to augment that with healthcare as well. So we'll be talking about that on the 26th, but one of the topics that came up on an earlier call had to do with identity proofing or authentication into these systems. And again, I see two use cases for that. And I think on this call, maybe we can go somewhat of the way towards separating those two pieces. One is the authentication of a user of a system, being able to get in and saying, Doug Tomlin claims to be this individual, Doug Tomlin claims to be Doug Tomlin, but how do we really know it is him? So identity proofing is what I have called, is part of the process there of authentication, proving that it is really Doug who is trying to access information in this system. And then there's another topic that we've started to discuss, and that is something that I have traditionally called patient matching. So if we've got an individual, Elena Nicolola, and she has a nickname, resolving that it is the same individual that we're talking about inside of an electronic healthcare record or any other system, uniquely identifying that individual. So I think both are topics that we need to discuss, and I'm open to any sort of naming convention that identifies what we're talking about, which one we're talking about at any point in time. One thing that I would like to do is reach out to Dan for a moment. Dan, I think you've got some background in the patient matching piece of this, and maybe you could give us just your perspective on that, if you don't mind, and introduce yourself, Dan.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Dave. Dan Chavez, Executive Director of San Diego Health Connect. San Diego Health Connect is the public health information exchange in San Diego and Imperial counties. Total population of the two counties is 3.5 million. Unique patients in our master patient index is 5.7 million. The difference being tourists, students, military, visitors to San Diego. San Diego as a community gets almost as many visits as Las Vegas, 35 million a year, come to San Diego for whatever reasons, business, etc. So fundamental to health information exchange operations is identity management. And this is from the patient perspective. So I can agree with Dave's two views: authentication of users and identity management as it relates to patients and patient records. We had an interesting challenge when we developed the HIE here in San Diego, in that we wanted the infrastructure of the HIE to resolve this automatically. We were very conservative in our approach. We required 6 variables to have 100% match for the infrastructure to do the automatic matching: first name, last name, middle initial, date of birth, gender, and social security number. Being a border town, the biggest challenges you might expect was social security number. So if we did not get 100% match, it went into an exception queue. So we used a well-known standard commercial off-the-shelf master patient index that utilized both probabilistic and deterministic matching, and that still was not enough. Tremendous challenges for the 8th largest city, 5th largest county in the country to do this for 100% of its population. It's largely done by transposition errors, but my formal name, if you will, is Daniel James Chavez, and I won't pick on anybody but myself. I use Dan Chavez. When I walk up to register to get a clinical appointment, I say Dan Chavez here for his 11 o'clock appointment. I am pretty sure they type in Dan Chavez and not Daniel James Chavez. But as you might expect, Daniel, Dan, Danny, DJ, Daniel James Chavez are all variants of this one single carbon life form, right? Now we've got the gender and we've got the birth date and we have the social security number on top of those combinations and variations. We augmented our MPI with something called referential matching, which was a cloud-based solution where a firm had procured a variety of identities from credit, from real estate, other public information, driver's license information, and we connected that to our master patient index And to make a very long, complicated story short, we went from about a 70% automated match to over a 98% automated match. Now, as it relates to interoperability, I view identity management as barrier number one to making interoperability successful. Barrier number two would be consent management, which we can talk about at a later date. And then only after you have identity management and consent management can you get to semantic interoperability. And I'll pause to take a breath and entertain questions. And Dave, you can lead us where you want us to go next. But that's our story. Our community would not go forward with the health information exchange until we resolve this challenge to about the 97% automated level. Most highly functioning health information exchanges in the country can do this to this 97, 98% level in terms of automated identity management and record location services.
Dan, this is Brian Hansbecker. Yeah, I'm here on behalf of Neem Health, but my past life was as the program architect for New York State's Office of Children and Family Services, where in fact we were trying to wrestle with exactly your same problem. And we were able to come up with a 99.2% match through, I think, a simpler variation on your approach. But I'm not trying to boast here. I'm trying to say there are so many different ways that we can solve this problem. And is there a way that we can get together at a national level to solve this patient identity problem? And this may be one of the great things that NIC can help handle. And I'm out. Thank you.
So Brian, I think boasting's good so we can all learn. I think we can converge on standard process, and I think that's what's required. So I share your goal, because I do view this as the first barrier to interoperability.
And I didn't mean that to be a boast, actually. It was a, hey, you know, we've found some solutions. You've found some solutions. Is there a place where we can get together and lay out the ways to solve the problem, and agree to do it on a standard basis, just because we've now all found the right ways to do it?
Well, I think we have to limit the combinations and permutations of how we do it, and we have to drive towards convergence on process. I would agree with that, Brian.
Dan, is this something that you would call master patient index? Does that fit what you're talking about?
No, it's really a process of identity management. Master patient index is simply a tool and an application that you can buy off the shelf. There are a number of players in this space. I'm not here to endorse one or the other, because they do use variants of probabilistic and deterministic matching. If you look at a single hospital institution or enterprise, on balance, even for within the four walls of that silo, you have a 7 to 12% duplication rate. Once you expand outside that silo, it quickly jumps from 20 to 40%. And when you get to a community like the size of San Diego, that problem jumps to 60% in terms of errors in identity and patient record matching.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So,
And for those of us, for what we were doing with the Office of Children and Family Services in New York State back in 2012, the challenge was, if we had a child that came into the foster care system, for example, who said, hi, let's imagine a 7-year-old kid who said, hi, my name is Cindy Lou Who. Well, she isn't necessarily going to know her address. She isn't necessarily going to know exactly how Cindy Lou Who should be spelled. So how do you turn around, and she definitely isn't going to know a social security number. And by the way, that would be, even if she did know it, it is not an allowable unique identifier for someone under 18. So how do you turn around and decide which Cindy Lou Who this is in, even if she knows what block she lives in Manhattan? And that's where we got into a system, by the way, that was associated with addresses and potential relatives for determining whether or not this was this particular Cindy Lou Who. But this is what makes this such an incredibly fascinating problem to solve.
And good on you, Brian, because you started with the hardest use case. Pediatrics and minors is incredibly hard. We found it beneficial to start with adults in our community and then move to the pediatric and minor use case.
And my apologies for starting with the hardest use case. It's just the one that we were presented with at the time. Sure. Between us, I think we can narrow in on a solution.
But absolutely. And on one hand, we have the technology. On the other hand, there's also a variety of other processes like naming conventions. And we met with our medical records departments in our community to converge on naming conventions. For instance, newborns, twins, hyphenated last names. Is the last name before the hyphen or after the hyphen? Right. And so it's those sorts of things above and beyond the automation that need to be discussed, documented, and agreed to.
Could I ask a question that perhaps pulls some of these threads together? So I hear, I'm sorry, is your name Brian, who was working in New York State?
Yes, Brian, yes.
I hear Brian talking about children. And Dan, I know that there was some concern with the solution that you're using, which is based basically on credit and on basically adult stuff, that it actually wouldn't be too good about providing referential matching for children. But now that you're a bit into this, how has that actually come out? Has the referential matching been useful for children who don't typically have the kinds of referential data that this company that you're using tends to draw on?
So agreed. That's why we started with the adult use case first, so that we had to back into the children's use case. And no, the referential matching at its initial implementation did not help with minors and pediatrics. We had to build some logic into that and do some mining above and beyond the adult use case to get the assistance for the pediatric and minor use case.
And
in New York State, because we were the Office of Children and Family Services, and mostly we were dealing with foster children and juvenile justice children who didn't necessarily have the cognitive experience, shall we say, to be able to uniquely identify themselves. We had this more challenging problem that we needed to solve, which frankly is not that. We had the worst case scenario, I guess, that might map into adults with disabilities or homeless people with addiction problems that might make them unable to identify themselves and things like that. And so that was our approach to it. How do we solve this bigger problem of identity management when you can't really count on the cognitive abilities of your user base?
So what I think I'm seeing here is this is a topic that will go on for a while. We may even want to try and identify a special work group with people who have experience in this arena. If we have time at the end, Doug, I may call out to you just to give you a chance, but to talk about your experience, just because I'm aware of some of your experiences. But right now, I'd like to turn the conversation to Surbanka Sokar from IBM, who's going to walk us through an implementation or the flow of the data. Dan, can you bring up, yeah, thank you.
Let me just interject 1 second here. This is Daniel. We have about 20 minutes. So Subhankar, if you can kind of run through this quickly, but I want to also just open up the floor. I know there's been a number of questions here. I want to make sure that we're addressing some of these questions as well. And to Dave's point, we might want to have some other work groups. And before we get off, I want to show you that we put up a Google Doc on the site where we're asking people for ideas around what kind of topics we should be addressing and some of the kinds of, maybe some of the work groups, because we do have the opportunity to do some work offline through the site. And I think that there's a lot of questions that are being stimulated here that we'll want to try to see if we can get some more input into. So Subhankar, you go, give us just a few minutes on the design here, because I know that one of the questions is this the same in social as it is in healthcare services? And I know there's a lot of conversation from the healthcare side. I know that you've been working a lot, again, in San Diego and elsewhere on credentialing, both inside and outside of healthcare.
Yeah, sure. And Carrie Hoff is there. So Carrie, please do jump in when I miss something. So thank you, Daniel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sure can.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so what you see on the screen that Daniel brought up, that's overview of the entity ecosystem, and that really remains fairly stable across domains. Now, there are two levels in the diagram, really. There are the actors and the interaction between the actors. And then so that's in the blue ovals. And then the green boxes are the specific manifestation of this ecosystem at San Diego. So I'm going to take you through the Constructor operations behind the customer portal at San Diego, which is a portal where county residents can firstly, they can create they can apply for credentials. They can apply for self-service access. Once they're granted the credentials, they can go in and review their data, self-report their address changes and other data updates. They can message the county. They can self-refer themselves for services. They can review appointments that they have, do various things. Extremely useful, right? Because it saves them from coming into the office and not being able to go to work and all that. Now, there are three parts to this that I will touch upon very quickly. One is just the identity of the customer. The second is the identity proofing problem to determine if the customer is, or if the identity claimant indeed is who is claiming to be. And the third is that once you have made the determination and issued him a credential, allowing him to come into various systems and perform transactions. So we look at it as three separate but mutually interacting problems. They are in their own separate spaces, though, and we solve those three problems in isolation and then bring the pieces together. So the identity is forming the composite identity of the patient or the customer is done through our MDM system and post-care MDM that's been around in healthcare for many years. We use, I'm not going to repeat the conversation that went on, so that's all, that's the kind of problems that we solve using post-care MDM. We use fuzzy logic and learning algorithms to match data and establish the MCI, the master client index, that matches the patient records across many systems. So that's the identity formation, the composite identity. And so when someone comes in and asks for a self-service account, that's the identity that he's trying to claim, right? So when he does that, firstly, we evaluate the risk associated with that identity, like let's say the identity belongs to a celebrity, or the identity belongs to someone who is enrolled in some sensitive programs, or there have been multiple claims on that identity in the past. Then we elevate the risk to high. If it's not, so there are 4 or 5 rules that we execute to estimate the risk associated with the identity claim. And based on that evaluation of risk, we then decide on a level of assurance that we should seek. So these are all formal definitions that exist in the NIST 800-63-2. And the way, and we map the risk, like for a moderate risk, we map it to LOA2, for higher risk to LOA3. And if it's very high, then we would ask the person to come into the office, which is LOA4. So, and then this is the identity proofing is executed by the remote identity proofing system, which you see on the left. We have attribute verification from the California DMV. Also, our own internal MDM system poses a Q&A challenge. That is a second method of verification. And the architecture is such that we can plug in additional verifiers like CRAs, credit reporting agencies, and all of that, right? And once the entity is proved, once we establish that John Smith is indeed John Smith, and then we send a registration request to the credential service provider, which is something like Active Directory or Oracle Entity Management. The credential provider then takes on the responsibility to issue credentials, and at that point, the client has a login and password, right? We also stamp that credential on the identity itself so that every time the person comes in, he only, that login can only access that specific composite identity and the records that are linked to that. And that's essentially a HIPAA requirement, right, for self-service, that you cannot see anyone else's records. So all of that is inbuilt in the system. It's part of the core architecture now, and that's the identity proofing jobs and the authentication jobs. So authentication, of course, is much more simple. We have the CSP, the credential service provider that's providing credentials, and then any relying party like a portal or an application that uses the CSP for SSO, for single sign-on, is good for the John Smith, for the customer to log into, right? So once he, and that's the beauty of the thing, that one identity proofing system can issue or can direct multiple credential service providers to issue credentials. And one credential service provider can support many applications, many relying parties. So just by doing the identity proofing in one place, we are able to enable an entire ecosystem. I'll stop right there. I know Daniel wants to keep it, wants me to keep it short. But yeah, happy to answer questions. This is the implemented system. It's working good. And we are very happy about the way it's come along. So yeah, I would be happy to share more details if you want me to.
Maybe in the future, we can talk a little bit about how you got all the stakeholder organizations to agree on some common, controls, agreements on security, and prior to kind of opening up all these connections and flows. I'm sure there had to been some agreements on, how to risk accept, various differences across these boundaries.
Well, that's a great question. And what we presented this morning, right, is again, 8th largest city, 5th largest county, was described as used by County Health and Human Services, but it's not used by the healthcare ecosystem. So here we have two very efficient, very competent systems that are replicated in San Diego. Therein lies the interoperability challenge.
Well, this is Carrie Hoff. I'm with the County of San Diego. I think some of the things that just need to be acknowledged that really do drive some of the development choices that may be different. And I'll use the remote identity proofing for our customer portal as an example. There are many commercial products that can help with remote identity proofing. But as we were doing our preparation during our RFP stage, one of the things through the research was that we determined is that, the population we are working with wouldn't necessarily have the financial footprint or the internet footprint to have successful confirmation through certain commercial products. And so we made a choice to build out something using the NIC standards and the levels of assurance. But I think the framework, the model is there. And I think the great thing is that you can plug in commercial products. So it doesn't make it now that they are wholly different methods that then cannot come together. You can make this additive. So I think in terms of where we are at maturity-wise in this whole industry, I think it is a time of, that can feel like a duplication. But I think some of that has to happen to get each entity up to a certain maturity level to then even talk about how do we converge on something shared that meets all needs. So
yeah, I think the first
something
step.
I'd offer.
I think the first step is, in my experience, in trying to connect, 50 different endpoints across the states with 10 or more agencies and a commercial RIDP source and over 1,000 insurance companies, is that you have to come up with some kind of a agreement for some basic things such as data use, common controls, establishing the basis for the trust fabric of, if you're credentialed in, let's say by California DMV, every other organization that's participating in the data exchange or access to data agrees that that is a reliable, source of authentication that everybody can trust. I mean, so those agreements in place often are necessary prior to figuring out, all the difficulties that were discovered and discussed earlier about, identity resolution and name matching and, address resolution. All those things come after the agreement.
Well, thanks. One of the things that I really see here is that we should consider having a separate work group to look at this. I think it's, we've got a lot of topics that we need to address over time, and I think it makes sense to get the people who are really focused on this to give them that opportunity to work together. So we'll be back on that. And I did take a note, Dan.
And by the way, I second that, just from the point of view of the children and family services folks, where often these kinds of issues are overlooked. This isn't simply a Medicaid problem of how we turn around and identify a patient. This is also a problem of how do we identify a young child who may not fully understand who they are and where they are in a system that they don't fully understand at all.
Yeah.
This is Marcelly. I just wanted to throw out a couple of ideas. So this is Marcelly Hancock, and I've spent an enormous amount of hours and weeks and months on this challenge of identifying children and custodial parents. And this was from NTIA in the congressional report, where the 49 attorneys generals were looking at how do we identify children and provide their custodial parents with rights for privacy consent on the web. So it's absolutely true. It's impossible to identify a child through credit agencies, with a few exceptions. They don't keep that until you're, anyway, at 18, we can identify adults through the credit side. I think if we look at the big picture that...
Are you reading my mind?
No, I've been in your space for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at the Behavioral Health Board in Santa Clara County, where in California, you can treat a 12-year-old child, but how do you verify consent for the things that need consent and confidentiality for the things that need confidentiality? And how do you do continuity of care and have patient safety when you're trying to do a child with variable rights or confidentiality? So I love I so appreciate this working group and Stewardship Change for getting us into the technical conversations of how do we create some confidence and verify identity, and the components around that, also consent and the components around that, and then ultimately the data elements. How do we create better dictionary translators, so that once we do get past the identity verification and the consent that meets the credentials, that then the data is meaningful. So I just want to throw out this very hopeful thought that I absolutely love when I love the IBM illustration of what Carrie has done and what's happened in San Diego, because now we have opportunities to work with the school systems who are very careful at obtaining custodial parent verification, because when I moved to California, I had to bring in my entire divorce decree to prove that I was a custodial parent, along with other things for credentials. So by working with cross-domain agencies, we don't have to agree to share the personal information, but we can provide a credential for each other in the groups that are convene, and give the extra assurance around just verifying the identities by not having to agree on everything, but by having confidence and agreeing on some. It exponentially opens the door for so much better interoperability and use of data, and particularly taking care of children.
And,
Thanks,
and,
Leslie.
and by the way, as on behalf of the ONC, as one of the ONC federal health architect, blah, blah, blahs, driving privacy and security, but privacy especially. I just want to second that this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
Not only provide identification, but also provide appropriate levels of privacy support, including making it available, not just making it not available.
So we're running kind of short on time here, but I did want to give Brian Hansbecker about 2 or 3 minutes just to talk about his seminar on NIC. Would you be prepared to do that, Brian?
I don't even need 2 or 3 minutes. I can let you know that that there is this thing called the National Information Exchange Model. It is required across many different federal agencies, that this particular XML model be used for exchanging information. And there has been a healthcare version of that model that has been floating around out there. It's not what would be called formally a domain, but certainly a community of interest for exchange, for defining healthcare information that might need to be exchanged. And the biggest user of it is the Justice Department. Second biggest user is immigration and screening. And the bottom line is this particular community of interest is about to be sunsetted by the ONC. And we are seeking other agencies who will agree to pick it up. The interesting challenge here is that, frankly, even when I came on board, I said, why aren't you just using FHIR? And I would assert that I'm still right. Why aren't we just using FHIR? Except that there are all of these edge cases we've identified over the last 6-8 months where FHIR just isn't the immediate solution. One big example is
Hey, Brian. Brian,
I'm just about to close, if you would.
Okay.
Is State Office of Children and Family Services, who can't afford to buy into a FHIR-based or any other standards-based EHR system. And under those circumstances, fire just isn't the answer for them, and yet they have a regulatory requirement to collect medical records for each and every one of their patients. So here is the opportunity for creating something based on NEEM health or a NEEM to fire bridge to allow for medical records to be exchanged from fire to NEEM. And I am done.
Well, you set up the call we are planning for a couple of weeks out, which will begin to dive more into this particular topic that Dave mentioned before, which is the NEEM, more about fire and the relationship between that, which I think is already, every time we bring the topic up, it generates a lot of interest and energy around that. So we'll definitely be coming back to that. What we'll do as well, Brian, if you want, you can post on the site that seminar that you're holding, and we can work more to make sure that's available to people who want to participate in that, as you can see on the site here. And so more voices in there would be helpful.
I shall, and I will use that to publicize it. Great.
I think that just for you folks, very quickly here, what we did is we added a Google Doc here that you can get to very easily for topic discussion, and we can also add other docs for specific conversations that we want to have. So I encourage you to go to that. On the site itself, it says add your voice here. Just by all means, go ahead and add your voices. We can expand that to other suggestions and ideas. Right now, as I said, there's 50 members on here, and you can find them on the members section here. There are a number of conversations. I just added one while we were talking about identity resolution and management. I suggest people reply to that if they're interested in joining that particular call, and then we can set that up, set that work group up, and Dave, you can help us sort of manage that as we go forward with the various voices here and how we collect that information. It seems to me one quick question before we drop off here, and then I hand it back to Dave, is we spent about an hour on the phone here. It seems like these conversations can certainly go longer. I don't know if it's a good idea to extend them to an hour and a half, or just to try to keep them within an hour time frame. I don't know if anyone has immediate sort of feedback on that, and maybe we can do a poll next time and check that out.
Yeah, this is Adam. I'm going to jump in for a second. I don't know if everyone heard it loud and clear that we will not be convening this group next Friday. Daniel and I have another commitment that day, and we'll resume the Friday after. So not the 19th, but yes, starting again on the 26th. And on the 26th, we will really enter this NEEM fire conversation in earnest. That's the plan. And we will send out emails to calendar entries to you all for successive weeks so that this remains on your calendar on a weekly basis, hopefully with a subject topic highlighted for each one, but not necessarily so.
And this is Brian, my apologies if I have been a little too verbose today.
No, it's fine. We want everybody to be verbose.
We just need more time. Dave, any closing words?
Yeah, and I think it was to Daniel or to Dan. I did catch the consent, and that will become a topic that we talk about as we move forward. Anything that you can share on your desire to make this a separate breakout group, because I think it's going to be something that is going to require some time to go through. So any perspective that you may have on having a separate breakout group for this topic would be great. Just one final thing, anybody that is going to the Medicaid Enterprise Systems Conference in Chicago, we're going to be working with Daniel Stewarts of Change and so forth to really show how to begin to integrate health and human services with Medicaid initiatives. So happy to see you all there if you're coming. That's all I've got, Daniel.
And this is Brian. My apologies for once again interjecting, but no, this is a wonderful and incredibly important issue. And if there is a way for us to all work together and work together with IBM and other companies to help get this resolved, it's critical.
Super. Thank you, Brian. And we'll try and we'll make time for you next time, Doug. I know you've got some real expertise in this area as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Say again?
No, I definitely appreciate it. If I had the web on, it would have been a lot of head shaking from my end. So really appreciate the input.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll be in touch. So that's all I've got, Daniel. If there's any other parting remarks, I know we've run over a little bit here.
Nope. Just a last reminder here is if you come onto the site and join, please put put as much information up about yourself as possible. I know that there's communication happening between members and ideas, trying to get your folks sort of motivated to sort of add comments and conversations and posts in our busy days and busy lives, but that will help sort of generate more ongoing interest on this. So with everything, appreciate everybody's participation today, and we will see you in a couple weeks, and hopefully online a bit more. Okay.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you. Thank you for creating this.
Wonderful. Take care.
Bye.